Reading online sport economics seminar. So thank you very much everyone for taking part. You should have had a little bar at the top of your screen saying that this is now being recorded, and I'm being told that I should let everybody know that this is being recorded. It's being recorded and will be streamed online, assuming all the technology functions properly after the event. And so you should be able to watch this back in your own time later, and those that were unable to connect, unable to make it, given time zone differences or meetings and so on, we'll be able to do so later. So I'm at the moment just about to share my slides with you, but just as a means of an introduction, this is an attempt to try and fill that gap between what we would have had in the absence of the coronavirus outbreak, which has brought essentially the entire globe to a standstill. So all of our conferences have been cancelled, and so many of our academic engagements have been cancelled or postponed. We can do things online, and so many of us will have spent lots of time in meetings over the past week or two via Zoom, via Microsoft Teams, via Skype, Blue Jeans, all these other formats, and so this is an attempt to step into that gap. There's a number of other online seminar series as well. There's a macro one that's starting up, I believe, almost as soon as we finish this at 4 o'clock, which is quite nice. And so there's a website with these virtual seminar series that you can find online. I am going to now try and share my screen so that you can see that. Just as a reminder, in terms of the ground rules, there's a chat. So if you are to go to the little toolbar that appears when you move your mouse towards the right-hand side of that, there is a chat icon, and if you hit that, then you will see a chat window appear on the right-hand side. And what we would ask you to do is to keep yourself muted, so otherwise there aren't too many background noises. And if you have a question, you're more than welcome to. I'm happy to be interrupted at any point. If you have a question, just let Carl know, Carl Singleton. He's been the referee for the session, and he will then give you the go-ahead to ask the question. And then you can unmute your mic, ask the question, and we can have a little bit of a chat based around your question. So I will now share my screen, try and find my slides, and then you will hopefully Rose's slides. And hopefully you can see that now. Just checking back. Yes, I've got a yes, so hopefully that means that my slides are now visible. So I will kick off with the actual seminar itself. I won't put this on full screen, just I don't want to disturb anything further than I already have done in terms of how this all works. So hopefully you can put it with a little bit of space around the edges. So this is the first Reading Online Sports Economics Seminar talk, and it's work that I've done with Carl Singleton over the past few weeks as the coronavirus or COVID-19 pandemic has taken hold. We've got the title here of Demand and Decision Making in the COVID-19 Pandemic, a case study of European football. We've since decided to split the paper into two, and so that's why you had two papers submitted that I emailed around yesterday. The idea is to split basically the demand part, which is having a look at the effect that the spread of the virus or the pandemic has had on sport, and also the decision making, because the implications certainly at the start of as the crisis began to take over Europe was that games began to take place behind closed doors, because obviously if the virus is transmitted, we're all aware of the need for social distancing now. You can't have thousands and thousands of fans in a enclosed space, even if it's outdoor. And so games were played behind closed doors for a short while before the leagues were entirely cancelled. And so that's the two sides so far. What happens then in games that take place behind closed doors, because there are studies that have looked at them within the field of sports economics that have looked at games played behind closed doors to find that there are significant differences in how those kinds of games pan out relative to games that are played with a full stadium or with any number of spectators in the stadium. So in terms of introduction, more so than I've already given, well, as we're well aware, the outbreak of the coronavirus, COVID-19, has had an unprecedented impact all around. And we might think that in the light of the kind of impact of it, so we've got, these are the countries that we're looking at in Western Europe, essentially the big 5 football leagues, so England, within the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, with many deaths, log scale here, so many deaths, certainly when we come to Italy and Spain, and the numbers are building up significantly in all of these countries, as well as the number of cases. We're well over 10,000 cases in all of these countries now, essentially. And of course, the focus on sport in the light of these kinds of situations might seem really rather trivial or perhaps in poor taste. And so, what I want to say at the outset is, I'm certainly very conscious of that. The coronavirus outbreak has affected Italy and Spain particularly badly, and a number of obviously these are countries we're going to look at. A number of participants today come from these parts of Europe, and the outbreak has affected almost all of us. I suspect all of us are in some form of lockdown wherever we are. We might think that the effect, therefore, looking at sport is rather trivial given that, but we can certainly learn something about what we observe. We can see the response of people, the learning, the understanding of the nature of the outbreak in the way in which people respond. So do people start to attend social events less, attend events that have people in a small condensed space where the virus may transmit? Do people start to do that less? Or does the information not really transmit in the way that we might hope or expect, particularly with different state level responses? So it's argued that in Italy, the response may have been a little bit slow, and it's also argued the same is the case here in the UK, with different kinds of responses, certainly in terms of when lockdowns were enacted. So in Italy, it was around 800 deaths when the lockdown was enacted. Here in the UK, more like about 200, I think, and differences in different parts of the world in terms of when the state responded to the spread of the virus. Also, another aspect of this as well, sport is an essential part of how we function as a society. I think it's safe to say if we're all sports economists, we all like sport, and therefore we probably all miss at the moment sport taking place. And so there's a huge social impact of sport. There is, of course, also an economic imprint as well, because many sports clubs, sports leagues employ many people. And so as a result, there's also an economic impact of that. There are contractual obligations in terms of the finishing of seasons for television contracts, so we learn sponsorship effects and so on. There's a sizable economic imprint, as well as that social side of things. And I think there's little doubt that most of us look forward to the point when sport returns, and that will be an important part of us returning to some semblance of normality, hopefully in not too long. So what we're doing in this paper is we're documenting the impact of the outbreak on recorded attendances in these big 5 leagues across Europe. And then we're also going to look at, secondly, this impact of the absence of spectators, given that a number of games took place behind closed doors, on match outcomes. Where do we fit within the literature? Well, those two aspects in terms of the demand for professional sports, the demand for attendance, well, it's a vast literature. within the economics of sport area. And so just one paper will be that by Tunde Varaimo and Rob Simmons from 2008 on the demand for sport, and there are many such papers. We only came across one that was able to look at the effect of attendance in the context of some kind of a shock, unexpected event, spread of a virus like the coronavirus, and that was a paper by Gitter in 2017 looking at Mexico and the H1N1 spread, looking at demand for sport there. The other strand in terms of the effect of games being played behind closed doors, well, that tends to impact on outcomes of matches, and that's the dimension that we're looking at it. And one of the aspects of that, of course, is the home bias, the tendency for the home team to win more often than it necessarily should, given its relative quality compared to the opposition. And again, there are many papers out there on the home advantage or the home bias in sport. One that's particularly pertinent for us is the paper by Pedersen, Lidbom and Prickside from 2010 on games being played behind closed doors. There was a spate of games behind closed doors in 2007 in Italy in response to hooliganism, and they looked at these particular games because it's hard to imagine that there wouldn't be some impact of playing a football match with no spectators relative to even a few spectators in the stadium. What they find is that there's less of a difference between the home and the away team in terms of red and yellow cards. So the argued mechanism there is one that's seen quite often in the literature, which is that the crowd influences the referee, and then the referee makes decisions subconsciously or otherwise that favour the home team, and the home team does better as a result and tends to win more often. So that's those two strands of the literature, and of course, equally, as already said, we're looking at how things pan out in the midst of a public health emergency or a pandemic, as we're in the midst of at the moment. And that reference is wrong. That should be, or maybe that's the first author of a paper with Simon Van Lewis that looks at the impact of public health emergencies on from a macroeconomic perspective. And then we've got three references here for studies looking at the impact of public health emergencies on the tourism sector. Clearly, we dip in slightly different from both of those, but nonetheless, this is the area in which we speak into with our analysis. In terms of then thinking a little bit about the data that we collect to do this, well, as mentioned, we're thinking about the effect on the demand for attendance, and so we need attendance numbers, and these tend to be quite readily found. Number of sources. What we've taken is information from the website worldfootball.net, and we looked at certainly for our attendance study in the initial stages. We looked at the big five leagues, so the Premier League in England, League One in France, the Bundesliga in Germany, Serie A in Italy, and the Liga in Spain. We also collected for the Champions League and the Europa League, these European competitions, not least because many of the salient games that took place behind closed doors were in the Champions League and the Europa League. So we collected that data as well to look at. And then in terms of getting data for the daily cases and the daily deaths from the coronavirus as it spread, we found that from the website Our World in Data, which has a lot of data that's made available. So for all countries that are affected, and there's a worldwide series as well that we've made use of. And it's worth pointing out that that information is information known at the start of each day. So the way in which that spreadsheet is collected and the date convention, the numbers are the numbers that were known at the start of each day. So if you're thinking about a match taking place in the afternoon or in the evening in any of these countries, this then would be information that was known at the point when people went to watch these sporting events. I've put up there results, attendances, and other outcomes. We do look at outcomes, so we look at home wins, away wins, and draws, and we also look at other measurable outcomes that we can get from World Football Net. One of those, some of them are the disciplinary outcomes, so red cards and yellow cards. And we also look at fouls being awarded as well. And finally, we look at penalties, the awarding of penalties, and also the the scoring of penalties as well. It's worth saying that we also, for the fouls data, we actually pulled data from ESPN for that. So ESPN has a commentary which tells you fouls as well. And in addition, from that data set, we have information on injury time as well, how much time was awarded at the end of games, and all sorts of different aspects of games played behind closed doors. This is the data. So we have summary statistics for the data. So we're looking at, in terms of match outcomes, we've got the much touted home advantage. So in our data, 47% of the time the home team wins the game, compared to just 26% of the time the away team wins the game. Now, of course, that's not conclusive of a home bias, but it's fairly persuasive evidence, given that certainly the league matches are balanced schedules. Hence, each team plays each other home and away, and so you might therefore expect things to be a little bit more balanced than that. Draws take place about 27% of the time. We've got attendances across countries. These are in thousands, so we can see about 25,000 people on average. We've got those closed door matches where no one was in attendance, and a maximum attendance there of 120,000. We calculate ELO ratings for teams, so we do that based on these matches from world football back to the late 1980s to get some sense of team strength. Clearly, team strength is going to matter for match outcomes, and it's also going to matter in terms of you expect the demand for attending games, both how good the home team is and how good the away team is. League standings are, of course, always possible to use, but they're obviously, when we're thinking about certainly comparisons between teams in different countries in European competition, there may be issues there. And also, to some extent, league positions can fail to necessarily reflect quality differences if teams have had, in the early stages of seasons, have had difficult runs of games or easier runs of games. So we use ELO rating just as a means of harmonisation across these leagues and different competitions. We've got red cards, yellow cards, fouls against, and then penalties awarded and penalties missed. And obviously we've got these, and we can think about these from the perspective of both the home team and the away team. And it's worth actually also perhaps noting that the average, the mean ELO rating for the away team is ever so slightly smaller than the home team, 1109 versus 1106. So the home teams are ever so slightly stronger on average, ever so slightly though. But these aren't the kinds of differences that ought to generate the home team winning quite as frequently as 47% of the time. So that's a summary set of statistics. In terms of closed door matches, just in terms of the data that we have, just to flesh these out, over the whole span of data, we have about 99 matches behind closed doors, and we only focus since 1987, when there's been, let's see, what's that, 60, 61, 51, 60, 61, so 96, sorry. 96 matches behind closed doors since 1987, of which the majority have been in France and Italy. And then in terms of international competition, there's been quite a few in the Europa League and a smaller number in the Champions League. So that's the number of closed door matches that we're looking at over a long period of time. It's not a huge number, but also it's not a tiny number either. And so what we're going to do then is obviously we're going to proceed to make use of this data to try and gain some insights. First of all, into the demand for sport in the context of this pandemic. And so what we'll do is we take a two-step procedure to do that. First of all, we model the log of attendance. We model it based on the home strength and the away strength to get some sense of the attractiveness of a given match in terms of demand. We've got fixed effects in there, not least for each match day, as well as the home team in terms of a stadium effect and across leagues as well. And so this is the first step where we model the log attendance. And the important thing here is to pick up these fixed effects, these point estimates DT, which are, Carl can correct me if I'm wrong, these are any given match day. And then we look at those, this is estimated back to 1987. No, sorry, we calculate the ELO ratings back to 1987, but we actually estimate this on matches back to 2015-16 season to give us a good baseline in terms of estimation and the effect that we'd expect to see of more conventional factors on attendance. And then we look at the point estimates of DT from this first stage regression, and we look at how they've been affected. So each given game week, how that was affected by the spread of the virus over the last few months. So we estimate a second stage regression since the start of January, and we're looking at the change in this week, match week or game week fixed effect as more domestic cases, more worldwide cases, more domestic deaths, and more worldwide deaths were reported. Was there any significant change in the average log attendance within a given country? And so our lambda 1, lambda 2 coefficients pick that up. So we've got additional cases, both domestic and worldwide, and additional death, both domestic and worldwide. And so these are the first set of results. This is the impact of confirmed cases on these log stadium attendances in this elite level of European football. What we can see is, if we look perhaps first at the country most significantly affected earliest, Italy, you can see that each 100 extra domestic cases of coronavirus lead to about a 6% decline in average attendances in a given week. And then worldwide cases, each extra 1,000 worldwide cases has an even stronger effect in terms of statistical significance, albeit smaller in terms of magnitude, about a 1% effect there of more worldwide cases. We've got an effect of domestic cases in France, a larger effect in magnitude, roughly speaking 16-17% kind of effect of domestic cases. Each 100 domestic cases in effect on attendance in France. And then in England, we have no effect of domestic cases, which perhaps reflects the fact that domestic cases arrived in the UK a little bit later than certainly in Italy and other parts of continental Europe. But there is an effect of worldwide cases. So we've got this effect of about 0.4-0.5% of worldwide cases. So each extra 1,000 worldwide cases appears to have a negative effect on the demand for attendance at English football matches, or Premier League football matches. There's no effect or no significant effect in Germany, although it's this sign of the coefficients is the direction that you might expect, for what it's worth, given that these are insignificant effects. 1.5%-ish in Germany for domestic cases, every 100, and about 3% for worldwide cases, but again, insignificant. The one that's a little bit unusual is the Spanish case. So this is a significantly positive effect of domestic cases. So each 100 domestic cases, we see an increase of about 13-14%. It's insignificant, but nonetheless, it's somewhat striking that the Spanish reaction appears to be somewhat out of line. Moving on to the effect of deaths, the Spanish case is somewhat, well, the surprising effect becomes a little bit stronger. So we've got here again splitting by country, and note that there were no domestic deaths in Germany by the point that football closed down and our estimation stopped. So we can't have an estimate for deaths, domestic deaths in Germany. In England, about a 6% negative effect. France about 10%, and Italy about 1 to 8% for domestic death, perhaps again reflecting the fact that those numbers were a lot higher a lot earlier. No effect across the board in terms of worldwide deaths in the hundreds, given the scale is quite different of these numbers. But then there is, as mentioned, this unusual or perhaps unexpected Spanish effect, which is that increased domestic deaths had quite a sizable positive effect on match day attendances. Now, one possibility is that because the virus's effect in Spain was a little bit delayed relative to Italy, certainly in Italy, therefore people in Spain may have observed the way in which the virus was spreading within Spain as a sign that games would soon be behind closed doors or even being postponed, as was happening in Italy, and therefore fans may have decided to turn up in somewhat greater numbers, as indicated by the coefficient. I think that there's a typo there, by the way. I don't think we have 467 consecutive match days. I think it should be 17 rather than that, because we're looking at match days since the turn of 2020. But that's this is the effect on demand for attendance at sporting events as a result of the coronavirus so far. So this is just a sub table. Quite keen to get any kind of input in terms of the nature of these results. Say Carl and I have circulated this a little bit amongst colleagues to try and get some input, but the Spanish effect is there and quite surprising. So if there is any kind of comment or insight that others may want to lend, more than happy to hear that, in terms of people that might want to chip in with comments at any point or questions for clarification. But this is the summary essentially, is that in terms of cases, you had reduced attendance in terms of significant effects in Italy strongly, France domestically, and in England an impact from worldwide cases rather than domestic cases. No effect of worldwide deaths domestically in Italy, France, and England, reductions for domestic death, but then this unusual Spanish effect. And so that's the first stage of the results. Clearly, in terms of applicability, this is a pandemic of a particular nature, something that few of us have experienced before, if any of us. And so there's a question of whether this is necessarily particularly applicable. Certainly, for example, say hopefully once matches begin to take place again, maybe in a month or two's time, might it be expected that fewer people turn up at matches because of the effect of the virus? Well, that's what these regressions might give some indication towards, but of course it's very different, because the way in which I suspect many folk now feel about the virus is quite different to how they felt early in the month even. In addition to that, it's documented that after the last two disruptions to European football of this nature, the two world wars, there was a boom in attendance in the subsequent years after the resumption of play. Sports fans and maybe just people more generally appreciated the things that they'd missed in terms of being able to watch domestic sport, this leisure industry, and so people returned in great numbers. And my sense is that there's some possibility that would happen, because there's a lot of there's no doubt that the pausing of sport has an effect in terms of what we do, what we enjoy, what we like to do. But that's the first section of the paper. So the second part is a little bit less well developed, but nonetheless there are some indicative results there that are perhaps expected but also perhaps a little bit surprising in terms of their strength. The two results that we've got, well, one of them seems quite consistent throughout a number of times we've run regressions over different subsamples, different specifications, different sets of fixed effects, and so on. What we're doing in the second stage is we're moving on to thinking about these closed door matches, so games that take place without spectators, because this is one of the responses was fans can't congregate because of the spread of the virus, therefore we'll play the games, but we'll play them behind closed doors so that the potential spread of the virus is minimized. And this then taps into, as shown in the table earlier on, previous matches in previous situations where they've been played, where games have been played behind closed doors. And so what we'll do in this part is we'll simply run linear regressions. So I'm just seeing that there's lots of comments that I'm just talking on here. I see Carl answering my questions while I'm going on. I guess I'll carry on because I don't want to stop and try and digest too much. But Carl, if you interrupt me if there's particularly important questions for me to respond to, that's probably the best way.
Yes, James.
Yep.
Brad asks a very good question. He suggests in the second step we should maybe think about, or even in the first step, we're missing something, not studying the variation, the residuals from the first step.
Okay. Yeah.
And understanding, maybe trying to pick more out of that. Do you have any ideas?
As in, so I guess we'll go back up. As in the first stage regression. So
yeah. So we only focus on the mean, but we're kind of throwing away all the variation.
Yeah, we should check the residuals, of course. You run tests for heteroscedasticity, is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
So it's probably, it is probably certainly worth us checking for perhaps things like, size of outliers and time persistence, things like that, certainly. And in addition, like you say, the variation. Yeah, I think absolutely it's probably well worth us doing that. So I think point taken, I think. Thank you, Brad. Was there anything else?
Not for now. No. Oh, a good suggestion was to look at basketball or look at another sport as well in Spain.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think what we need there is we need obviously equivalent numbers in attendances. I've always found it really easy to find football attendance numbers, and it's not necessarily quite as easy for other sports. But if the data's there, yeah, absolutely, we should certainly do that. Okay, in which case, looking at the second step or second stage of the inquiry, looking at outcomes. These different kinds of outcomes, what we're essentially doing is we're running the same regression model, a linear regression model, which is a linear probability model in the case of binary outcomes. So we treat the home win, the draw, and the away win as binary outcomes. We don't estimate them together in any kind of ordered logit at this point, for no particular reason. It's just what we've done so far. We look at red cards, incidence of red cards. So that's just a 0-1 essentially. Even if there's more than one red card for a team, we just treat it as a 0-1 variable. Yellow cards is the number of cards, so that's a linear regression rather than a linear probability model. And then fouls committed. So it's worth saying that the fouls committed data is definitely from ESPN. And so that's why you'll see in the tables in a little while that there's few observations when we look at the fouls committed regressions. Penalties awarded as well. Penalties awarded, that, Carl, is binary. 1 if a penalty was awarded to a team, 0 otherwise. And then,
yes.
Yeah, okay, cheers. And then penalties scored. So whether given a penalty's been awarded, whether it was then scored by the team. For these non-result outcomes, so for cards, fouls, penalties, we also include referee fixed effects as well, just to control for whether certain referees have particular observed patterns in terms of the awarding of these kinds of things to different teams. So I think first in terms of the results, again, as mentioned, separate linear probability models for the home win, the draw, and the away win in columns 1, 2, and 3. Fairly parsimonious specification. We have the attendance effects, the effect of the home team's strength and the effect of the away team's strength. all things I think that we'd expect. Stronger the home team, the more likely the home win. Stronger the away team, the less likely the home win. Vice versa for the away win. An attendance effect. Obviously, it's a blunt explanation at this point. There's no mechanism here for why. There's more home wins when the attendances are greater, but nonetheless, there is an effect, a small effect of greater attendances on both home wins and away wins. Both are significant. And there's no effect, or at least no significant effect, of games being played, those 96 games being played behind closed doors. So in terms of the coefficient, well, it says that maybe 6.5 the home team is 6.5% less likely to win, roughly speaking, if it's behind closed doors, and the away team is perhaps 4 or 5% more likely to win if it's behind closed doors. But these effects are both, as said, insignificant. So we're not looking at particularly strong, tightly estimated effects here. There's something there, but it's not particularly, it's not significant at any rate. And so that's the kind of, I guess, the headline in terms of outcomes. No significant effect, but certainly indicative effects. And so looking in a little bit more detail at these matches, these different outcomes, we can look at, first of all, this table is home team effects. So this is the effect on if a home player gets a red card. So you can see there's an effect that stronger home teams are less likely to get red cards, for example, and so the team strengths again come in significantly quite a lot of the time in ways again that would be expected. But there's no effect, certainly in terms of things being given towards the home team of the game being behind closed doors. No significance across the board here in terms of a game being behind closed doors. There's an attendance effect on cards. Perhaps potentially interestingly, it's positive in the sense that the higher the attendance, the more likely home players get these yellow cards and red cards. But the effects are that there's no effect of these games behind closed doors as far as home players are concerned. And again, this estimation goes back to 1987 and covers these 96 closed door matches in that time. Then moving on to the away team. Well, here we've got, again, red cards, yellow cards, fouls committed, penalties, and penalties missed. And there's a more scattered effect of team strength here, so no effect of team strength on red cards for the visiting team, for example. In fact, nothing at all of any real significance in explaining red cards for the away team. Yellow cards is perhaps where things are most interesting. We've got quite a significant effect here on yellow cards that the away team gets maybe as much as almost a half of a yellow card less if the game is behind closed doors. And then there's also an effect here of a stronger home team, more likely away team gets a yellow card. Stronger away team, less likely that a yellow card is given, with a small effect of attendances as well. So these games behind closed doors, we get a significant decrease in the number of yellow cards being awarded. There's no effect, or at least no significant effect, on fouls being committed. And Carl, again, this is fouls against the away team, or is it for the away team?
Sorry, this is fouls awarded against the away team. Okay,
sure.
Yep.
So insignificant negative effect, fewer fouls given against the away team. So it's in a direction that might be anticipated, but it's not significant. In terms of penalties, there's no significant difference in terms of penalties being awarded for games behind closed doors. There's an effect, again, you might expect from ELO ratings. But what's quite interesting is that given a penalty is being awarded, what's the likelihood of that penalty being missed or being scored? And what we find is that you're significantly less likely to miss a penalty if you're playing behind closed doors. And that's this is a linear probability model, so this is a binary variable, 0 or 1. So you can see that you're significantly less likely. What's that? That must be about a 40-50% chance less that you miss a penalty. Now it's worth saying that's quite a fascinating result, but it's based on a very small number of penalties actually being awarded. We have these 96 matches, of which there's only been 6 in which a penalty was awarded to the away team. that awarding isn't in any sense. Well, I mean, it is negative, but it's not significant. But once the penalty's been awarded, players, it seems, certainly over the years, always score those penalties that have been awarded. Sample of 6. So there's an effect there, both of arguably of a referee action. These yellow cards are being awarded over and above team strength and other significant factors we'd expect to see in football matches. A referee effect, given we also have a referee fixed effects in the model as well, and potentially a player effect as well, in the sense that maybe players play differently. If you're taking a penalty in an away match and the stadium's full of the fans for the team, perhaps you feel pressure in a different way than when you're taking it in an empty stadium. So in terms of summarising that, we've got a insignificant effect on match outcomes, although it's towards the away team, as might be anticipated, and significantly fewer yellow cards for the away team. It's potentially a referee effect, and significantly fewer penalties missed by the away team, and potentially therefore a player or team effect. And I don't know, Carl, are there any questions that people want to ask at this point, or?
Yes, Alex asks, how do we explain the positive effect on home teams, if you scroll up, of attendance on yellow cards, when the literature tends to find the opposite? I think you muted yourself, James.
Muted me. Didn't want to hear me. I don't know. My instinct is probably that the attendant possibly picks up something else. Maybe we don't have an effect in there for, say, derby matches, for, say, particularly tight matches. We have the strengths of the home team and the away team, but we don't have anything to capture the non-linear interactions between those strengths, or non-sporting effects. Attendances are probably higher for derby matches, for example, I guess, or contentious matches, and that might lead to there being the positive effect. I don't know, is Alex convinced by that?
I don't know.
Okay, so you've shared something, Alex.
Okay, I think we're near the end of the presentation, aren't we, James? Should we open the floor?
Yeah. I can wrap up and then we can have an open, more broad discussion. So, just in terms of wrapping up overall, this is an early analysis of the impact of the coronavirus on football, perhaps therefore with the application to sport more widely. The negative impact on attendance generally is noted, with the unusual effects of games in Spain. And of course, that said, the wider applicability is not necessarily clear in terms of immediately in terms of sport, but there has to be something potentially in terms of the spread of information, the spread of or the different reactions, at least measured in the aggregate of a pandemic, of a virus viral outbreak of the kind that we've witnessed. One of the manifestations of it was games behind closed doors, and of course, it might be that there are restrictions on the size of gatherings as we move out of the crisis. If we have to maintain social distancing, the capacity of stadiums will be dramatically reduced, and so we might. So therefore, looking at the effect of attendance and games being behind closed doors is of interest, and so we've looked at the impact of these closed door games on outcomes and found this effect of fewer yellow cards and penalties missed by the away team, and so that kind of matters if football returns behind closed doors, and there seems to be continual mootings of this idea at the moment, certainly here in England, about how football will resume once the crisis is over. So I'm happy to stop there, and then essentially we can have an open discussion from here. And I guess I'm quite happy if you want to simply unmute your microphone at this point and make a comment and join the discussion. There's no reason why we wouldn't have a fairly open discussion at this stage. Seems Vlad's saying that the impact when the crisis is over depends on habit formation. I think absolutely, certainly from my mind, the reluctance to, to now be in spaces where you're crowded is massively different to how it was just a few weeks ago. Feel very nervous in the supermarket now if somebody walks by closely relative to how you might have felt only a few weeks ago. So I think there's certainly something to be said there. But folk, if you want to unmute, you're more than welcome to in terms of making points. Tunde, thanks for that. How easy it is to change the unit of observation from match to minute of match. This is true. It's possible in principle. We have the times that these cards were awarded at. So in principle, that's possible. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, go on, Brad. It's concerns that cases are endogenous, that as in the spread of the virus is related. Okay, of course, yeah, the testing matters as well. Yeah, certainly. And of course, we've got the deaths effect. Some of the more morbid results I've ever produced as an econometrician in my life. So I also shouldn't take the credit too much because Carl did much of the data work. But deaths effect seems a little bit, certainly the domestic effect is stronger there. With the international effect being less pronounced, the effects seem a bit more consistent. Guess I might say expected, except Spain, perhaps. I don't know. Dennis mentioned team-specific trends earlier. I think it may be important because those teams that play or played against a Spanish or Italian team in a continental league may respond differently to others. So you may all be familiar with this news article that's now in the Associated Press the last day or two. It was put out a bit earlier in Repubblica in Italy, suggesting that the game between Atalanta and Valencia was game zero for the spread of the virus, both in Italy and in Spain as well. People here in the UK kind of talk about 2,500 Madrid fans going to Liverpool to watch Atletico win there, and potentially the effect that may well have had on the spread of the virus. Team-specific trends. We have home team fixed effects in the model. Yeah, also exclude teams playing in Europe. Brad's suggestion that we, in response to Tunde's comment on timing in the match, since I think if this is recorded and people are listening in, the comments won't necessarily be visible. We could look at just the last few minutes of a match and look at the effect. I wonder what would the expected effect of looking at the last few minutes be? would it be expected that somehow the intensity was different because fans exert more of an impact on the referee as the game becomes more, fan influence be larger at the end of the match, Yes, I mean, we could actually look at first half, second half, the first step, and then maybe split it up by 10-minute intervals or something. So Dennis says the difference between fans of teams that have or have not played a team from Italy or Spain is the interesting comparisons. So the idea there would be, if you've played a team in Italy and Spain, you might be much more aware of the existence of the virus, than if you hadn't done. We could certainly look at that because there were obviously matches. There was the first leg, this game 0, Atalanta at home against Valencia, and there must have also been that first round of European matches, Europa League as well as Champions League, the set of first leg games which took place, and then there would have been domestic matches following that. And you may well have seen a different level of concernedness if your team had played. Yeah, and Liverpool fans would have gone to Madrid as well for the game in Madrid. Tunde, my thinking for minute by minute was that the scoreline at that moment time may influence outcomes, cards and penalties. Yeah, absolutely. So again, we'd want to have what the scoreline was at the time that that the event took place at. Absolutely, thank you. Alexandre Rebello, maybe instrumentalize the number of cases for the number of days before the suspension of the league or the first game with closed doors. Certainly, so that would be as an instrument would be, I'm not totally sure how to work that, but certainly that's something that we can certainly look at. We know when the first game behind closed doors took place, and obviously we know when games stopped taking place, and we can find out when the announcements were. For example, when the Premier League announced it was stopping until April, and so on. We can certainly do that. Yeah.
Okay, I think we should maybe wrap up now. Do you think, James? It's a good trial run, I think.
Yep, happy to wrap up. If there are any final points, people can quickly hammer them in now, just as we wrap things up. But thank you very much to everyone for taking part. I'm going to stop sharing, so maybe I can return to your screens should you want that or not. But thank you very much, everyone, for taking part. I will now be able to have a look at the comments as they've come along while I've been talking. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Carl, for moderating. I think we've got a lot of stuff to think about over the next few days. Obviously, we hope to submit one of these 2 papers quite soon. But thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for contributing. And as a few of you are saying in the comments, everyone, please do stay safe. And we hope to be able to be doing this physically again at some point in the future. But in the meantime, we'll be doing this again this time next week when Alex Creamer is going to present his research. So I look forward to seeing you all online in a week's time. I hope you'll have a great weekend, as much as you can under lockdown in your various places. And see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.